I spent a year mourning my husband, only to discover at his grave that I wasn't the only woman who called him husband. The gravel crunched under my boots, a familiar sound that had become the soundtrack to my grief. It had been exactly 1 year since I lost Mark. 1 year, 365 days of waking up to the empty space beside me in bed, of making coffee for one, of seeing his worn leather jacket still hanging by the door, a silent, heartbreaking sentinel. The crisp November air bit at my cheeks, but I barely felt it. Numbness was my constant companion. In my arms, I held a bouquet of sunflowers. They were out of season and ridiculously expensive, but I didn't care. They were Mark's favorite. He always said they were the happiest flowers and that they reminded him of me. My own personal sunshine, he used to call me, tucking a stray piece of hair behind my ear. The memory brought a weak, watery smile to my lips, a ghost of the real thing. His plot was on a small hill overlooking a quiet pond where ducks sometimes gathered. He would have liked the view. I knelt, my jeans instantly damp from the cold earth, and began my ritual. I cleared away a few stray leaves that had drifted onto the polished granite, my fingers tracing the cold carved letters of his name. Mark Reynolds, beloved husband, 1985-2022. A familiar ache bloomed in my chest, tight and suffocating. I placed the sunflowers in the built-in vase, their bright yellow heads a stark, almost defiant splash of color against the gray landscape. "They're beautiful," a soft voice said from behind me. I jumped, startled. I was always alone here. It was my sanctuary, our place. I turned to see an older woman, perhaps in her late 60s, standing a few feet away. She was elegantly dressed in a long wool coat, a silk scarf tucked neatly at her neck. Her hair was a perfect silver helmet, and her eyes, though clouded with a gentle sadness, were sharp and intelligent. She was holding a single, perfect white rose. "Oh, thank you," I mumbled, feeling oddly exposed. She offered a small, sympathetic smile. "He always loved sunflowers." My blood went cold. A knot of confusion tightened in my stomach. How could she know that? We didn't have many mutual friends, and certainly none who looked like her. Mark's family lived on the other side of the country. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "Do I know you?" The woman's smile faltered, replaced by a look of deep, profound sorrow. It was the kind of look you only see on people who have become intimately acquainted with loss. "No, dear. We've never met. I knew of him. Through my daughter." She took a step to the side, and I realized she wasn't here for Mark. She was here for the grave right next to his. I'd barely noticed it before. It was a newer plot, the grass around it still patchy. The headstone was identical in shape and material to Mark's, a detail I found strangely unsettling. "Your daughter?" I asked, my gaze flicking to the name etched into the stone. Ilara Vance. 1988-2022. She had died just 3 weeks before Mark. A tragic coincidence. The woman knelt gracefully, her movement slow and deliberate, and placed the white rose at the base of her daughter's headstone. Yes, my Ilara. She knew Mark very well. Something was wrong. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. The way she said "very well" sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. It was possessive, intimate. I stood up, brushing the dirt from my knees. "I don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mark never mentioned anyone named Ilara." The woman looked up at me, and her eyes were filled with a terrible, heartbreaking pity. It was the kind of pity that made you feel like your whole world was about to be ripped out from under you. She saw the wedding ring still on my finger, the raw grief on my face, and for a moment I thought she might just stand up and walk away, leaving me in my ignorance. But she didn't. She took a deep, shuddering breath, as if steeling herself for what came next. "I'm sure he didn't," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked from Mark's grave to her daughters, then back to me, her gaze unwavering. "It would have been complicated." "Complicated how?" I pressed, a wave of dread washing over me. "Who was she to my husband?" The old woman's face crumpled, the elegant mask of composure finally breaking. A single tear traced a path down her powdered cheek. She looked at the two graves, sitting side by side like a silent married couple, and delivered the words that would shatter my entire existence. She was his wife. The words hung in the frigid air, weightless and yet heavy enough to crush me. His wife. I think I laughed. It wasn't a sound of mirth, but a sharp, ugly bark of disbelief. It was the sound of a mind rejecting a truth too monstrous to comprehend. "That's not possible," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You must be mistaken, or you're incredibly cruel." I took a step back, clutching the neck of my coat, creating a physical barrier between myself and this woman's insanity. "I am his wife. We were married for 10 years. I have the marriage certificate, the photos, the memories, this ring." I thrust my left hand forward, the diamond on my finger catching the weak winter light. The woman's gaze dropped to my ring, and the pity in her eyes intensified, turning my blood to ice. "I know, dear," she whispered, and the quiet devastation in her voice was more convincing than any shout could have been. Alara knew, too. It broke her heart every single day. My own heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. "No, you're lying. Mark loved me. He would never—" He had a small white scar just above his left eyebrow from when he fell off a swing set as a boy. She interrupted, her voice soft but clear. "He hated the taste of mint, said it was too aggressive. He hummed, completely off-key, when he was concentrating on something. He always tapped the top of a soda can 3 times before opening it." Each detail was a tiny, perfect arrow, piercing my armor of denial. They were small, intimate truths, the kind of things you only know from sharing a life with someone, a life I thought was exclusively mine. My mouth went dry. How do you know that?" "Alara told me," she said simply. Her hands, trembling slightly, went to the clasp of her handbag. "I never wanted to do this. After she was gone, I thought I would just let it be, let you have your memories. But seeing you here, you deserve the truth. We both do." She pulled out a worn leather wallet, and from it, a slightly creased photograph. She held it out to me. My hand shook as I took it. And the world stopped. It was Mark. Unquestionably, Mark. He was on a beach, the sun high in the sky, turning his hair to gold. He was smiling, a wide, genuine, unreserved smile I hadn't seen in years. His arm was wrapped around a woman, a beautiful woman with dark, curly hair and eyes that shone with laughter. He was kissing her temple, his expression one of pure adoration. He was wearing the garish floral shirt I'd bought him as a joke before his solo work trip to San Diego 2 years ago, the one he'd claimed to have lost. My breath hitched. The trip. He'd been so distant when he came back. I'd chalked it up to work stress. I looked from the laughing woman in the photo to the cold granite stone bearing her name. Alara. It's not real," I choked out, the words tasting like ash. It's photoshopped. A trick. It was their 7th anniversary, the woman said, ignoring my desperate plea. They went to Maui. He told you it was a tech conference in Austin. Her voice was flat, devoid of malice, a simple statement of fact that completely dismantled my reality. The foundation of my life, built on a decade of shared moments and whispered promises, was crumbling into dust. The car crash. The official report said it was an accident, a rainy night, a slick road. He'd been coming home from a late night at the office, or so I was told. A sudden rage, hot and blinding, surged through me. "Who are you?" I spat, shoving the photo back at her. "Why are you doing this? To ruin his memory, to hurt me?" For the first time, her composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling onto her pale cheeks. "My daughter is dead," she said, her voice breaking. "My only child. The doctors said it was a pulmonary embolism, but I know the truth. She died of a broken heart. He had promised her he was finally going to leave you. They had a terrible fight that night. He wasn't driving home from the office, dear. He was driving from her apartment. He was angry. He was driving too fast." The air left my lungs in a painful rush. It was too much. A secret wife. A secret life. A secret fight that led to his death. Each revelation was a fresh crack in the ice beneath my feet. The woman, whose name I didn't even know, took a steadying breath and reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a small, old-fashioned brass key. It was tarnished with age, attached to a simple metal ring. She held it out to me, her palm flat and offering. "He gave this to Alara on their 1st anniversary," she said, her voice barely audible over the wind rustling the dead leaves. "It opens a safe deposit box at the old First National Bank downtown, box number 418. He told her it held their whole life, everything they had built together, everything he was afraid for you to find." The key felt heavy in my hand, a cold, solid piece of a life I never knew existed. For 3 days, I didn't move. I sat on my sofa, staring at the brass key on my coffee table, next to a framed photo of Mark and me on our wedding day. His smile in the picture now looked like a lie, a carefully constructed mask. Everything was a lie. My sunshine was a shadow, and I had been living in the dark. The grief I had carried for a year was mutating into something else, a monstrous, venomous anger. On the 4th day, I drove to the First National Bank. The building was an old, imposing structure of marble and granite, a mausoleum for secrets and money. My hands trembled as I signed the visitor log. The vault was cold, silent except for the clicking of my heels on the polished floor. The attendant, a bored-looking young man, used his key and then mine to open box 418. He slid the long metal container out and placed it on a table in a small private viewing room before leaving me alone. I stared at the box, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it, the proof, the life Mark had kept hidden from me. With a deep breath that did nothing to calm my nerves, I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no secret fortune, no incriminating documents detailing a vast criminal enterprise. It was something far more mundane and infinitely more devastating. It was a life. Their life. There were bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, written in Mark's familiar, messy script. I opened one. "My dearest Alara," it began. "Another day pretending, another day my heart aches to be home with you." The date was from 6 years ago. There were photographs, dozens of them. Mark and Alara at a pumpkin patch, him playfully putting a tiny pumpkin on her head. Mark and Alara on a ski trip, covered in snow, their noses red from the cold. Mark and Alara on a simple park bench, his head in her lap, her fingers tangled in his hair as she read a book. In every single picture, he wore an expression I hadn't seen in years, a look of unguarded, uncomplicated happiness. He looked free. Beneath the photos was a velvet box. Inside was a simple gold band, identical to the one I wore, but smaller, her wedding ring, and next to it a small leather-bound journal. It was Alara's. Her handwriting was elegant, a looping cursive that filled page after page. I opened it to the last entry, dated the day before they both died. He came over tonight. I gave him the ultimatum, her or me. For 10 years, he's been promising. Just a little more time, Laurie, he always says. It's complicated. But my life is wasting away in the waiting room of his. We fought. Horrible things were said. He stormed out, saying he needed to think. But I saw it in his eyes. The fear, he's never going to choose me. He's a coward, and I'm a fool for loving a ghost who is married to another woman. I can't do this anymore. My heart can't take it. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the delicate paper. She hadn't been a villain. She was just another woman who had been lied to, another victim of the man I thought I knew. He hadn't loved me more. He hadn't loved her more. He had just been too weak to choose, and his cowardice had destroyed all 3 of us. I closed the box. I didn't take anything. That life wasn't mine. It wasn't my anger to hold on to or my grief to process. It belonged to the woman with dark curly hair and the sad-eyed mother who visited her grave. The next day, I went back to the cemetery. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I found Alara's mother sitting on a bench near the pond, staring at the 2 graves. I sat down beside her, the brass key in my palm. I told her everything. I told her about the letters, the photos, the journal. I described the look on his face in those pictures, a look of happiness I realized I had been missing for years. When I finished, she was crying silently, her hand covering her mouth. I placed the key in her hand and closed her fingers around it. "This belongs to you," I said softly. "It's her life, her story. You should have it." She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed but filled with a new kind of light, a flicker of understanding, of shared loss. "And you?" she asked, her voice raspy. "What will you do?" I looked at Mark's headstone, the carved letters that now felt like a foreign language. Beloved husband. The words were a mockery. He wasn't mine, not entirely. And I finally understood that my grief wasn't just for the man I lost, but for the man I never truly had. "I'm going to let him go," I said, and for the first time in a year the words felt true. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in years. I slipped my wedding ring off my finger, its familiar weight now a burden. I walked over to his grave, knelt, and placed the ring on the cold granite right next to the now wilting sunflowers, a final goodbye to the ghost I had loved. Then I turned, gave Alara's mother a small final nod, and walked away, not looking back, toward a future that was, for the first time, completely my own.